Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Town of Grafton Select Board's workshop for January 12th, 2021. Open the meeting at 7:26 p.m. Just as a preliminary matter, I just want to remind everyone that my name is Peter Carlson. I'm the chair of the Town of Grafton Select Board. Please permit me to confirm all members and persons anticipated on this agenda are present and can hear me. Select Board members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Mr. Often? Mr. Often?
Often is here.
Ms. Roy?
Roy here.
Peter Carlson is here. Not present tonight would be Ms. Doreen DeFazio, and Mr. Ed Prisby will not be attending. Staff members, when I call your name in the affirmative, please respond. You're here. Mr. Terenzini, temporary town administrator.
Present.
Okay, and we have Mr. Berger here tonight.
Mr. Berger should be in the audience, just listening.
I see. All right, somehow I make you go back to a attendee, but that's fine. Good evening, everybody. This open meeting of the Town of Grafton Select Board is being conducted remotely consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020 due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a public accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you can find posted at the town's website at www.grafton-ma.gov, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will not feature any public comment for this workshop. For this meeting, the select board is convened via Zoom, and the town's website identifies how the public may join. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by video conference. Please be aware that people may see you and that take care not to screen share your computer. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording and viewed by the public at a later date. All supporting material that have been provided to members of this body are available at the town website and when final minutes are posted, unless otherwise noted by chair. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless I, the chair, will note otherwise. Just some ground rules. Please allow me to introduce each speaker on the agenda tonight. After they conclude their remarks or presentation, I will go and ask the members, inviting each of you to make any comments, questions, or motions. Please hold your name until it is called. Please remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For tonight's meeting, any vote that we take will be conducted by roll call. Okay, before I go into the first agenda item tonight, I do have an announcement to make. It is with great sadness and unfortunate news that Nancy Hazen, a 30-year employee of the town of Grafton who retired several years ago, passed away yesterday. I just wanted to convey on behalf of the select board, all the town departments, and a grateful town, our sincerest condolences to Ms. Hazen. For those of you who don't know who Ms. Hazen was, Nancy began working at the town hall as an assistant to the executive secretary of the selectmen back in the 70s and through the 80s, worked her way up as executive secretary for a number of years before we even brought on a town administrator after 1986. Nancy had worked in that position for a number of years, retiring a few years ago, and had served this town with great distinction, with honor, and with a dedication that I think all of us could look up to. I just wanted to ask the board and the town and the members attending tonight to please take a moment of silence for Nancy Hazen and her family while they go through this difficult time. Thank you. All right, so for just a quick update for the members and the people watching tonight, we have some minor changes to our agenda tonight. We will be passing over Grafton Sustainability Commission because Mr. Prisby could not join us this evening. In addition to that, we will be passing over online permitting. We wanted to have all staff members who are presenting to be available tonight, so we will bring that to a future meeting, whether it's in a couple of weeks or at the next workshop. We'll figure that out in the next few days. So first up tonight, we have Mr. Terenzini here with us is to continue our cannabis retail marijuana establishments, the first across the finish line discussion at our workshop. And I want to hand this over to Mr. Terenzini to update the board and developments.
So the concept of first across the finish line was adopted by the town to give a sense of urgency to those who were developing recreational marijuana establishments, retail sites. At the time, you were given advice by council that you could execute as many HCAs as you wanted. And then when the Cannabis Control Commission inquired as to whether or not folks were in compliance, you would say yes to the first two. And then after that, you would say no. The challenge is what constitutes an establishment. And in this instance, I think all are agreed that the limitation is only met when stores are operational and open for business. So you've had some frustration, I would say, in terms of the pace of development. I can tell you that does appear to be picking up here a bit. Mr. Berger, you might want to have him comment on the status of some permitting when we finish this discussion. And thanks for joining us, Bob. So what we did was we made up a set of protocols, the kinds of things that perhaps should have been in place from the beginning, to try to clearly establish how, if you got additional applications, you would deal with those, and then how you would deal with them throughout the process. Those were circulated to the board members. We did get a few comments, and then that was sent off to council to put it into a little bit more formal policy nomenclature and the like. So the first, the statement of purpose here really speaks to this formal adoption of this first across the finish line approach. It was verbal, it was in meetings, it was recorded, but it was never really put forth in written policy. The next proceeds to some specific action steps. This is for current licensure holders and for those who might come along in the future. So the idea here in number one is that should someone approach you for an HCA, that you would first require they hold their community information meeting. And the idea of that is so that you can get a sense as to whether or not there is concern in the neighborhood. And so that you have those concerns when you negotiate that HCA. From what I saw of the record, it was really kind of the other way around. And this allows the board to negotiate the HCA knowing the concerns of the neighborhood, and it doesn't put you out front of the neighborhood. So once you have that community information meeting and you have the request to enter into formal HCA, the board would vote whether or not to authorize the town administration to begin negotiations with any applicant. And my suggestion is that should you decide to do that, the board require that the applicant make a deposit to the town sufficient to cover the town's legal costs in negotiating the HCA. And that way those costs are on the applicant and not on the town. Point 4, this would go into future HCAs should you get applications for them, is we're suggesting that you, as long as you have a limitation of any size, that you put that limitation right into the HCA so that it is front and center and no one can suggest that they weren't aware of it or that you changed the rules or anything like that at all. And further, it requires that the applicant acknowledge the policy exists and that it holds the town harmless for any claims for damages should it not become operational prior to the limitation having been met by other entities. That's not in the current HCAs. You did have someone come along in the not too distant past and asked when you change the policy and the like. So this going forward would put that front and center. In getting a request from the CCC as to whether or not an applicant is in compliance, you would comment on the general bylaws, the zoning bylaws, and only if your limitation threshold had been met would you say to the CCC that the applicant was not in compliance. This is a little bit upside down from what council had previously advised. Council had said that once you had those first two requests from the CCC, after that you would say no, they were not in compliance. This takes the position that until the first two RMEs are formally established and operational and selling to the public, that there is no barrier. This is a true first across the finish line, not a first to apply for provisional licensure. I'd like to come back to number 6 in a moment, Mr. Chairman. Item 7 says that if the policy is adopted, that the town administrator would then inform the current holders of the HCAs of the policy and encourage them to proceed with all due haste. That's just to make it clear. Yes, you may have been in a meeting. Yes, you may have read something in the newspaper, but here's a formal letter. This is the first across the finish line. These are the limitations, and they will be enforced. The last point is that once the local limit is reached, the town administrator would advise the CCC of the same. So let's say that you've gotten 3 requests from the CCC. Are they in compliance? And none are operational. So once the first 2 are operational, you would immediately then send notification to the CCC that your limitation has been met, and you would leave it to them to sort out. Also, should the limitation be increased, the town administrator would notify the CCC of the same. Coming back to number 6, this was intended to be additional touch points. That is, so that when they've come to you, they have the HCA, or they've gotten the letter that says, remember, it's first across the finish line. The idea was that each and every time they came in for a local permit, they'd get a reminder. Okay, we have not yet met our limitation, but do understand it's first across the finish line, and whoever gets there first wins this lottery. Council is concerned about that, and I think I understand the reason why. The first is council feels that it's the obligation of the applicants, of the entities, to do their due diligence, to know what's going on and to stay on top of things. I agree with them to a large extent. The other concern is that the flip side of this is that we might be mistakenly, and this came to me after I'd reviewed council's comments, creating a situation in which a licensing entity forgot to tell them they could fall back upon that as a defense, saying, well, you issued the building permit and you had told everybody else it's first across the finish line. You didn't tell me. So I just kept going ahead, figuring everything was okay. So it might make sense upon the advice of council to drop item 6. So those are the things that we put together as kind of a tick list. It is a little bit, horses out of the barn. So we're kind of doing some things to remind those who are in play currently. We're setting up a system where if someone else comes into you, you would have this affirmative requirement to put into the agreement this formal notification, and more importantly, they're signing off on holding you harmless should they lose any monies because they proceed and then aren't able to get the doors open. So that's draft number 2. Possible wholesale deduction of item 6, and happy to answer any questions or make any modifications that you might think make some sense at this point.
Ms. Roy?
So I have a question about number 1, where you're saying that they should hold a community information meeting prior to seeking approval for the HCA.
Mhm.
The community information meeting, is that the same thing as the community outreach, which technically how in Grafton, what we've done so far is they came in, most of them came in, met the board. Hi, nice to meet you. It was an informal community meeting, and then got the HCA and then held another outreach meeting. Are you saying instead of doing that, we'll do an outreach meeting first, then issue the HCA?
Yeah, so the community outreach meeting, or what we refer to here as the community information meeting, and we can certainly change that to community outreach. That's when they advertise to the general public. That's when the neighborhood can come in. Because what I saw you do, and this, I don't have the depth of institutional knowledge, but what I saw you do was some folks came in, they made a presentation to the board. Then there was a motion at the board to authorize the administrator to enter into negotiations. You had no idea what was going to happen at that community outreach meeting, what the concerns were going to be from the neighborhood. So what we've done in other communities is kind of stand that on its head, where we let the board know what's going on. The board gets an invite to the community information meeting. And after that happens, then the applicant comes before the board, requests an HCA, and the select board authorizes the TA to negotiate. The idea is to have the community outreach meeting occur before you take a formal vote on the applicant. It's just a matter of respect to the neighborhood, in my opinion.
I agree. I like that outline better. It makes sense to me. My only question is, does that affect the CCC's timeline? Can they have the community outreach meeting prior to having an HCA, or will they be essentially having to do 2?
I have not seen it be a problem anyplace else. There's no specific, I think there's a 60-day timeline, if I recall correctly. I'd have to go back and look, but I don't believe this would be a problem. I don't believe it's been a problem anyplace else.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yeah, I like this approach better. I like having a feel for how the community in that particular neighborhood will react to a business being in a particular location as something to inform the board's decision and with regards to entering into an HCA. So I love that. I think this policy is very good. Carter, I gave you my feedback on this in draft 1, and you obviously had incorporated it. I think it's just as effective if we just remove item 6 altogether. I would take on board our general counsel's advice on that, and I don't think we should constrain ourselves or expose the town to any unnecessary burden or liability to provide clarification to the businesses if in fact we're writing that into their HCAs going forward, and it should be incumbent upon the businesses to know exactly what their position is with the town. So I'm happy with the rest of it.
And I don't think removing it does any damage. Her main concern was that it's their due diligence responsibility. You've seen how faithfully that is carried out in some areas, which is part of why we're having this discussion here again tonight. But when I got thinking about it, I did think, so what happens if one of the licensing entities at some point forgets to tell them? Would that give them a fallback position? And so I think we could remove that without it harming anything at all.
I'd agree with that. And I guess the other piece is, you know, the horse is out of the barn, kind of. We don't have any businesses that are operational in Grafton. I don't know what's going to happen with the financing, the permitting, the CCC process, the build outs. There's a long road to travel for all of these businesses. So I don't think, well, I guess I'll say it the other way. It's important for us to have this in place, and it does provide some needed clarity to the businesses that are working to develop in town. So I think there's a lot of value in this.
I do think that the discussion has created a bit of urgency amongst the several applicants. How that has translated, perhaps Mr. Berger can update us if he has that knowledge base here tonight. And if not, we can certainly get something into the weekly report for you.
Mr. Berger, did you want to come in? I know you're in as a panelist tonight. If you wanted to address Mr. Terenzini's question.
Yeah, can you repeat the question, please?
The question, Bob, is I know that the several entities are in varying stages of either getting complete applications done or they're pulling partial permits to try to get rolling a little bit. Can you give the board any update on the status of these entities?
I can. 13 Centennial Drive has applied for a full permit, but we're going to release it in phases because their construction documents are not complete 100%. So to keep their construction going, so it doesn't have a stoppage to it, they have a demolition for the interior space. And as soon as that demolition is done, I'm hoping that their permit will be phased to the interior renovations for the dispensary up front. So I think they're the first ones they're going to proceed with something that they can open the doors. 135 Westboro Road has a permit for interior demolition for investigation reasons only, and another permit to side the outside of the building. That's as far as 135 is gone. 130 Worcester Street has a permit of demolition of the building. That building is now down. They applied for a full permit to put up another building on top of the existing foundation. The problem we have right now is they don't have a special permit for either a retail space or a marijuana dispensary. So they need to go in front of the planning board to get permission to do one or the other. And that's my report on establishments for the marijuana. And Peter, just so you know, I followed the notice on the agendas meeting. That's how I got in where I am. So I don't think I pressed the wrong button. I think there was an extra link that I shouldn't have seen.
Understood. Thank you very much, Bob. I appreciate that. I'll work that up. Don't worry. It's Zoom. Something
Okay.
probably changed in Zoom. Yeah, thank you.
I think it was helpful to have Bob able to give the board a little bit of insight into the status here, because I do believe it is this conversation that has put a little bit of petrol into the tank, if you will. I'm not sure they would each be moving slower than we would like, but I'm not sure that they would all be moving at the current pace if this subject hadn't come up.
All right. Any other questions for Mr. Terenzini on this? If not, so I don't know how the board feels about next steps. I know this will eventually come back to us for some sort of final review. Personally, I would like to have potentially a public hearing to allow the public to have an opportunity, invite everybody saying, hey, this is what we're proposing, how the public come in and provide some comment, but advertise that. That way you're giving them an opportunity. Kind of helps instead of just having this on the agenda and letting people in as from attendees and stuff. So I don't know how the board feels about having that set in future. Any discussion on it, Ms. Roy?
Is that common for the board to have a public hearing prior to creating a policy? Or would this be setting precedent that now we would be required to be doing public hearings, setting policy?
There are two requirements to having public hearing. One is a legal one, which we have to abide by. The other one is at our leisure. It can just be a public hearing that we're just allowing the public to come in and give comment on this policy. As to the public coming in and providing comments on this, I think when you're dealing with something as significant as this, I just wanted to propose the question to the board tonight. Personally, I like them when there's something of substance. All right, but if there is a desire to do it, we can move forward with that. If not, then we could skip that altogether and just go right to a future meeting and adopt. Does anyone have any other
It
questions?
doesn't really answer my question, though. Is this something we've typically done in the past, having a public hearing prior to creating? So this would be the first time we're doing that?
No, that's why I said it's the board's discretion and when it wants to have a public hearing about what it wants outside of things that are legally defined. Like poll hearings, we
No,
have.
I get that, but I'm just wondering if we've done this before, and it sounds like we haven't. Is that what you're saying?
No, I don't know how to answer that because, this might go beyond me where they might have had a public hearing on a policy they created 25 years ago. We wouldn't know if they had a public hearing or not. So I don't know. I can't answer that.
Okay, so it's done so infrequently that it's not something we usually do is probably the best answer.
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay.
Any other questions? Yeah, Mr. Hoffman.
I'd be in favor of moving forward with just adopting it. I think, that the purpose of the policy is to clarify in writing a policy that expresses what has long been the town's stance and to correct a previous position, I guess, that was taken at one point that really didn't express the will of the voters, which was to limit operational recreational marijuana establishments to 2. So that there was just a misinterpretation or misunderstanding of what that actually meant in practice, which actually worked against the interests of the town. So all we're doing is clarifying, what people voted on at town meeting to impose that limit. So I don't see this, I guess, as significant as you do, maybe. So I'd be in favor of just adopting it.
Okay, so we'll move this on. If there's any other questions on this, Mr. Chiarenzini, did you have anything last things to say?
No, we'll try to get it cleaned up and on your agenda for the 19th for final adoption.
Sounds great. Okay. All right. Concludes that part of the business. Next up on our agenda this evening, talk about recycling, trash. Do I have that next? 1 second.
So, William's with us because he's done a little bit of legwork for us on this issue. And just to recap, you will recall that we came to you in part of the run-up for the budget to bring you some very bad news with respect to the solid waste contract. It expires here on June 30 of 2021. And you have been the beneficiary of the current contract, which required the contractor, E.L. Harvey, to deal with recyclables or commodities, as we refer to them, without being able to make any upcharge in case that should not be a profit venture. Over the last number of years, recycling pricing has gone in the negative in a number of areas, partly by the closure of a number of the Chinese markets, which required a higher degree of purity than most processors could meet, partly because of market fluctuations, partly with respect to glass, because of the way the product now comes through the single stream plants that are sorting the materials. Our best estimate was that the increase in commodity pricing alone would be somewhere in the $155,000 neighborhood. It could be upwards of 170. That's really going to depend upon both the monthly fluctuation in commodity pricing and then the total amount of tonnage that is recycled. And at that time, we advised you that you basically had four options. Put the entire contract out to bid. We did express some concern that in the consolidation of the marketplace, there are now relatively few entities that might bid upon that. Essentially, at this point, you're down to Waste Management, Casella, and DL Harvey in this region, with none of the smaller entities likely to scale up to meet an operation of curbside collection at the town of Grafton. You could absorb the price increase between commodities and the inflation factor. We suggested you'd be about $175,000 plus or minus above the current FY21 budget. We suggested the third option was to increase the pay-as-you-throw pricing by as much as 40% to offset a majority of the increase. And then finally, something no one really wants to consider, ceasing the service entirely and going out of the business. This would actually yield you a savings of about $475,000, give or take, because your budget would go down substantially, but then your revenues would go down as well. So we struck out after that meeting. We were asked to look at some additional things. We'd had further conversations with Harvey. They were agreeable to capping their processing fee at $90 per ton. Perhaps we'd want some audit language. And so basically, you saw the report that they issued. You might want to have some access for audit. You might want to just keep an eye on that so that it can't go above 90, but it could perhaps be below that at given points in time. The two major negatives in the waste stream right now, about 15% of the waste stream is what's referred to as residue. That is people putting things in the waste recycling stream that simply can't be recycled. This is often very lightweight plastics, like you get your strawberries and blackberries and such at the grocery store. Forks, knives, plastic forks and knives, sheet goods, the grocery bags, that kind of thing. And then the glass, that's about another 15%. That has a negative price, and I think that Paul Canoyer shared that with you when we had that discussion. So we also reached out to Irene Congdon. She is the recycling coordinator with Mass DEP for the Central Mass region. She's been at this for well over 20 plus years now, has a wealth of knowledge, and she made a number of suggestions that could be explored. The first is that perhaps we could take some of the items that are causing monetary issues, glass, for instance, at a drop-off center while curbsiding the balance. So people would curbside perhaps newspapers and plastics and those things, while taking the more problematic issues to a drop-off center. That would have to be explored as to where that would be, how that would be run, and what the financial impact of that would be. The other suggestion, this was Ms. DeFazio, suggested that we move all of the recycling to a drop-off or several drop-off centers. Again, that would really split the waste stream. People would put their regular refuse out at the curbside weekly. but then they would have to get their recycling to this one or several drop-off centers, and then we would have to manage that as well. In terms of having more expertise and not having the burden of managing these drop-offs centers directly, we did reach out to the Blackstone Regional Recycling Center. They have a cooperative arrangement with Northbridge, where Northbridge pays them a flat fee every year, and then Blackstone staffs the drop-off center in Northbridge. Northbridge has said that they would be open to discussing the matter, but that they could not quote any price or any time frame until there had been more detailed discussions about where the center would be placed, what hours of operation you would expect it to be open. They would need to be involved in a discussion of what's acceptable and unacceptable items, how the material would be transported out. There is a requirement that recycling be offered. Ms. Congdon has opined that they can be separated, that it does not have to happen at the curbside, though she cautions that the recycling would most likely drop in volume quite a bit, which could be problematic. Ms. Congdon also advised that because of the problem with commodities and a reluctance to increase the pay-as-you-throw fees, and we gave you a survey to show that you're relatively low amongst your peer communities, that some communities are starting to move to a charge per household model. This works best when you have a municipal electric company, or you have municipal water to every address and the like, where these communities have or will be simply adding a charge every month to the electric bill. So much for electric, so much for your recycling bin. And that allows the community to create a secondary waste stream without increasing the pay-as-you-throw pricing. She did recommend that communities that have done that have tried to give something value added so that it's not just a price increase by adopting an organics program. That is the removal of organics, household waste, food refuse from the waste stream, and instead moving it to a composting program with a local farmer or the like. Finally, we could pursue simply adding an organics waste program. It does decrease the projected cost, but it will also decrease revenue stream in that you won't have these organics going into the pay-as-you-throw bag. The big challenge here is I think that each of these things that have been suggested are really, with the exception of Hamilton, Massachusetts, are really evolving. The compost in Hamilton is now compulsory across the town. And William has put some information in here from Hamilton. It's really too early to tell exactly what the impact is going to be. So which of these alternatives could provide the biggest net change in this $170,000 plus or minus increase in the budget we've been talking about? We honestly don't know, but I think we do know one thing. I'm fairly confident in saying, especially given the desire to have an open community-based discussion of these various opportunities, I'm fairly comfortable in saying the odds of having an alternative other than the original four that we presented ready to be part of the budget process and rolled out on July 1 I just don't see the time being there to get that done. I'm not suggesting you shouldn't continue to pursue these alternatives. But I just don't see it being ready in the short term. So that's the best we can bring you as of tonight. We are at a point where we need some sense of direction, both from budgetary impact and if you want to negotiate a 1 year or a 3 year agreement with the L Harvey. But we need to get that started. And if you go for a 3 year term, which I think truthfully would make some sense, the tricky part will be to have the triggers in there as to how, if at all, you cease curbside collection in favor of some other model, or you add organics, or you do something like that. That would probably be the biggest trick of having that. Yep, here's a contract for 3 years, but we want the option in year 2 to do, we don't know what just yet, but we want that option. And here's how that option would impact pricing. I think that's the trickiest part of the whole thing. Can't think of anything else much we can share tonight, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you for that update. A lot of work that went into that. Does Mr. Blake have anything he wants to add while he's here tonight?
Hello. I do not. I believe Mr. Terrangini covered everything that I have helped put together for him accurately.
Okay, thank you. Does any board members have any questions? Ms. Roy.
So one of the options was to increase pay-as-you-throw 40%. So that's talking going from $9 per package to $12.60. Is that correct?
I'd have to go back and look, but something along that line, yes.
Okay.
You'd be at $12.50. You'd be at $2.50 a bag on the large ones, and you would probably do $1.40 a bag on the smaller ones. I've found that in many communities they don't make it just a 50-50 split. The smaller bags actually become a bit of a profit center. So maybe you do $7 on the small bags and $12.50 on the large bags. Now, that's if you go 40%. There's nothing to say you couldn't do 30 or 25, and then we would just rerun the numbers as to what the net impact would be of that type of increase.
And you said in the communities around us, we're relatively low for what we're charging as pay-as-you-throw currently?
You are, I'd have to go back and look. It's in the report from the last meeting. I'm afraid I don't have it in front of me tonight, Colleen.
If I may, I actually did have that pulled up in front of me. Grafton currently, of everything in this data sheet, is the lowest, going up to $2.50 per large bag, and I believe Mr. Terrangini just said $1.40 per small bag would put us pretty much in the middle of the pack.
Okay, Mr. Often.
Of some of the alternative options, like adding organics, going with the regional collection center, or I guess those are the two main ones that I was interested in. Could either of those be done before July? My sense of it is we'll probably end up doing some combination of things. So is there anything that we could move on now, given some direction, in combination with bags, that could kind of get us something that would give us maybe not all the way where we want to be, but I'm very much interested in, I know just there's been a lot of discussion in Grafton, and we've started to bring in private companies for doing composting. That one in particular, just from a volume standpoint, is pretty interesting to me. So I'm wondering if something like that is mature enough at this point to be able to roll out in a town like Grafton within that time frame.
I think some progress could be made on it between now and then. I honestly don't think you could get anything in place. The most likely to put in place, if you could have a local farm that's interested in the composting. E.L. Harvey has some knowledge in the composting we can pursue with them. Bear in mind that the moving from curbside recycling to drop-off center will have most likely negative PR impacts as well. So the lowest fruit here might be to pursue the composting, which we would be happy to get started on if you wish us to do that.
Got it. Yeah, I think that's something that I think could help the equation here a little bit in a pretty major way, even if we didn't get fully rolled out. And if we could partner with our current provider to be able to add those services over time, maybe that's something that even if we can't get it done, before the beginning of this contract starts, that if they're going to be getting the business, that we can structure that contract in a way that would be beneficial to both the town as well as them. So I don't know, that's something that I'm interested in, I guess. I think that, yeah, the drop off and discontinuing services, I think is going to be really problematic for us for a lot of reasons.
And I think that even if composting was viewed as household composting, pushing that using grant monies that we had to buy kitchen top or countertop, small scale, and then teaching people how to do backyard composting, that would help take some sting out of the price increase and would be a good way to get started and show some positive PR at the same time. But we could certainly have a fuller report and bring, I would start frankly with E.L. Harvey. If they have existing access, they might be able to add it on their every other week recycling. And we can bring you Ms. Congdon at your February workshop to expand upon all of this. She's offered to come in and give a presentation to the board.
Love to hear from her.
Okay. Anybody else? Any other questions? All right, I'll work with Carter on bringing that to a future agenda item for us to consider. All right. If we don't have anything else, I guess we can move on to the last part of our agenda, which was talk about some of the interim and long-term procedures for licensure. This is just kind of left over from some of the commentary we had over the past couple of weeks with regards to licenses and some of the things that this board has discovered. And wanted to open up the discussion on here, give you guys a chance to talk first before I say my piece. So I don't know if Mr. Often and Ms. Roy, if you want to chime in first. Mr. Often.
Yeah, I guess I'd be in favor of, I think Carter discussed in our last meeting, the potential for essentially amending all of our licenses across the board. So I'd like to see a short and long-term approach where we deal with the entertainment licenses in the short term, because those were the immediate concern. And then we deal with the other licenses and review and update of those license as a later on in the year, I guess, so that we can get some things done now that are of more import, but also have a more thorough review later on in the year. So I'd like to see that approach where we compare how Grafton does its licensing with what other towns do around us. I looked at a bunch of them. There's very, very few towns whose licenses look anything like Grafton's. They're clearly way out of date. So I'd be in favor of just doing a compare and contrast and do some addendums to all of our licenses to add things like we could address outdoor entertainment. We could certainly address the weekend hours. We could address some of the noise complaints that have come up as maybe as a part of the outdoor piece. So that there's a lot of elements that could be considered. Those would be the things that I would look to do.
All right. Ms. Roy, did you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I agree. I think I would like to go like top to bottom and review all the licenses and decide what should be included and maybe remove some of the older stuff that's no longer relevant.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I know I made mention it last week. Some of that information is from acts of 1926, and as we notice on there, there's a lot of those things that I don't even think legally would hold up if it were challenged. But going forward, I too would like to see some of the more immediate things dealt with, especially with the music licensure, like in advance of anticipation of outdoor dining being become a reality again, if and when the state decides to do that. I think they were aiming towards April 1st, but I don't have any. I don't know if any other board members or Carter has any dates on that, but I would like to see whatever these temporary measures are just for this current year for COVID related to be, the deal with this outdoor entertainment. To your point, you know, I want to get, even a little bit further and structure these licenses so that way they have to identify areas of where the performances will take place. And if they want to change it, they can notify the town and file something with the TA's office identifying. But I think it would be helpful for anybody who has to maintain compliance to know, like, this is where they'll be doing it. So that way people in compliance can give, appropriate guidance to anybody who wants to have outdoor music. I agree with the hours of operation. I think, and even the days of operation, I think that's something that needs to be addressed as well. And I also would like to see, maybe some of the noise components dealt with in a way that it notifies the neighbors that there will be some outdoor music during these times. And something for those neighbors to have that they could, if there is a problem, what is their procedure? What is their, what is their way of reporting if it is, in their estimation, from a subjective standpoint, too loud, than what it typically is. So I would like to see that. I know that may sound like a lot. I think a lot of it is, very straightforward and easy to remedy, but I would like to see these implemented with some feedback from the owners as well, and see these implemented before April 1st. Any other questions or comments on that, Mr. Hoffman?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think if I had to guess, I would guess that some of these business owners have enjoyed having outdoor music, and this presumably would be part of their, even after COVID's gone, well and gone, would be part of their plans in terms of, getting revenue and providing a good environment for their customers. And I'd like to support that to the extent possible. But also we do have to deal with some of those neighborhood issues. So I just want to be making sure that I think it's a great idea to get some input from the business owners that have had outdoor music to see what their plans might be going forward. And I'm also a little bit concerned about enforcement. I don't want to be putting the police in a bad situation where they're being repeatedly called and don't have as subjective a way as possible to deal with the business owners that are going to pursue that approach. So, so I think there is a lot of discussion to do. It might benefit us to do everything else and pass those amendments and then have a separate workshop around outdoor music, because I do think that's going to be a little more complex.
All right, I was a little confused. I'm thinking more, I'm just wait 1 second. I apologize. I just wanted to follow up. So my inclination was just dealing with the music licenses in general. That would be the immediate ones to really deal with. That's where I was going at, Mr. Often, was looking at temporary measures, and then at some point looking at something permanent going forward for anybody who would want to have outdoor music, if their location and property, allowed, such an accommodation. Ms. Roy.
I guess one of the questions I would have is, how would we handle this going forward? If we go through and amend these, we'll just stick to music licenses and add outdoor music, add hours. All of these things will most likely benefit the license holder, but do they need to apply for it again? Or do we say this is now part of your license, even though that's not what we issued? How will that part be handled?
I don't know. I kind of envision that it's something that if they're interested in, they can come in and say, yeah, we would like to have the outdoor music, and maybe they have to provide supplemental information. I think one of the areas that I would like to see is, having the establishments define where that live music will take place. So that way there is a designated area where they're going to set it up, is it within X amount of feet away from patrons, all that sort of thing. That way it's all clearly laid out and it's not open to, a very loose interpretation, right? So I would like to see that refined a little bit more. And I think that process would be, okay, if you want to have outdoor licenses, we have this already. Here's the things that you need to fill out. It would, and I believe, I kind of look at it as like to an addendum to their existing license that would last until the end of the year. And that addendum would only be good for during COVID-related accommodations.
So would this be a good time to potentially do a public hearing so we can hear from not only business owners, but neighbors to get input on how we might want to word the license?
It's up to the board. Like I said, is there any precedent on this? Probably not. But to the question you mentioned earlier, I welcome a public hearing on these types of things personally. Mr. Terenzini.
Yeah, this is a little different to me because it's not like we're creating policy, we're just updating a license. So for me, I think having people who hold the license would be valuable to hear what they think, as well as people who would be affected by the license.
Okay, Mr. Terenzini.
So if you decide you wish to go forward in this two-phase approach, if you will, my thought had been to invite all of the current restaurateurs and holders of entertainment licenses to a Zoom meeting, which would have Mr. Allen from the economic development perspective, Mr. McGoldrick from the planning and zoning perspective, Mr. Berger, both from zoning enforcement and from building requirements once the tent gets above a certain size and it has this and the like, and to say to them, okay, April 1 is coming and what can we do to help you be as successful as possible for 2021. And long term, we'll talk about it at another point in time, but we're looking for what you need to do from an operational standpoint. We can ask them questions, and then we can take that and distill all of that into a fairly simple policy, similar to what we just did with the cannabis. The board, if it chose to proceed with that, could then adopt it. And we could then tell all the businesses, okay, the board just adopted this and we want to save as much time as possible. So here's the quick and dirty application, get it into us. And if it's not real pretty, it's not perfect. What we did in another community was the select board said, okay, fine, we approve all of them, subject to the town administrator filling in the blanks with the applicants, so they didn't have to keep coming back over and over. So we tried to streamline it as much as possible. I think it could be, we'd have to figure out how to get the neighborhoods involved if you wanted to do that, because we're really trying to do something in about 60 days that helps get these businesses ready for April 1. Long-term changes in your licensure policy, absolutely, by all means. You should try to get the public at large involved. Let us think about how we can meet your objective and yet try to keep the timeline as tight as possible as well. And remain pro-business in the view of the restaurateurs and the license holders.
Yeah, I'd agree with that approach. I think that makes a lot of sense. We deal with this year, and then at a later point in the year, we look at all of the licenses, involve the public, and talk about what next year's license renewals would look like. And the applications potentially and the actual licenses themselves would be very different. So I think that's a sensible way to move forward.
Ms. Roy.
The only thing I keep rattling around in my mind is noise will absolutely be part of the discussion for an outdoor entertainment license, and we don't have a noise bylaw to refer to. Is that something that should be happening in conjunction with this so that we have one going forward? Or is this such a temporary thing that it's not foreseeable to create one? Or I guess that's just something I keep questioning.
Noise,
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Jones.
noise ordinances are historically difficult to enforce. They require, setting decibel levels at different distances. They require having decibel meters and people trained in how to do it. And you would be relying upon the town adopting a bylaw in order to make the limitations on noise in your licensure valid. I think that there might be enough loose language. I know it's 1926, but maybe in this case, we want to look back at some of that language before we had decibel meters and we had some of these other things. And if you do this on an emergency basis for the year, you might gain some useful information out of it for policy you would be considering adopting for the long term. I would try to keep it simple at the outset.
Anybody else? I didn't think about using that, Carter, as a, for the emergency basis, using that as a baseline, to, assist and develop maybe some more of the permanent structure that Mr. Often first alluded to earlier. I feel that's a great idea. I didn't even think about that as an added benefit. So I'd be in favor of that as well. Does anybody have any other comments or questions? All right. Well, that concludes our meeting for tonight. As for some of the takeaways, I'll work with Carter over the next couple of days on coming up with scheduling for some of these next action items. We'll have stuff for us next week with cannabis and move forward with setting up a future meeting with terms and discussions on recycling and getting that moving forward. And same thing here, getting some updates on a regular basis from Carter on, looking at two parts of this, the emergency licensure part of it for COVID for outdoor music only. And that we look at all of the licensures, I guess, to over time and start making sure are they current and are they meaningful and they make sense. So besides that, do we have anything else that that I missed just from a high level? Okay, at that point, I can entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second,
Motion made and seconded to adjourn. All those by roll call, please. Mr.
often I.
Ms. Roy,
Roy, I.
Peter Carlson, aye. Okay, declare the motion adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody. Carter, thank you for coming in tonight. Mr. Berger, thank you. Mr. Blake, everyone. We'll see you next week.